Hey everybody, this is Pastor Derek. I'm here with Keith and Ralph and Tommy and Mark, and we are continuing our discussion about the Passion Week, the last week of Jesus' earthly ministry leading up to his crucifixion. Today's Thursday, so we are talking about the Last Supper. I'm going to ask Ralph if he would go ahead and read from Matthew chapter 26. So if you're following along with us, we're going to start reading in verse 17 and read down through verse 30. Ralph, go ahead and read that for us.
Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man, and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he reclined at table with the 12. And as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi?" He said to him, "You have said so." Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of this vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
All right, so this is that very intimate scene with Jesus and his disciples there in the upper room celebrating the Last Supper. And from this point forward, Jesus will leave. They'll leave there. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane where they pray together. Then Jesus is arrested. So really, we're getting down to the final few hours that Jesus has with his disciples before his crucifixion. It's just getting to be that time of the moment and that time of the week where things are getting real for the crucifixion. So what jumps out to you in this passage? What did you find in your reading and your study of this?
Well, I'm looking at here that, I looked at this and kind of told our students about the Passover and how Jesus is our Passover lamb. But I thought, this was my thought on how this is. There's a question of whether this was prearranged meeting at this guy's house, whoever's house it was, or if it was a miraculous event. And this is what I said. Either way, Jesus was the only one to be able to do both of them. Whether it was prearranged, anybody could do that, but nobody else could make it a miracle. So does that make sense? So if it was done both ways, if it was either way, only Jesus could have done that. And so I thought that was pretty neat. It was probably prearranged. He probably knew somebody that had a house big enough to accompany all of them, and he went ahead and prearranged that. But there
is a miraculous element to it either way, though. Keith, you were talking about this before we started recording about the water pot. That's not in Matthew, but it is recorded for us. Tell us, give us a little bit on the water pot. What happens? How do they find this man?
He's carrying a water pot, and Jesus told him, go into the city and see this man that's carrying a water pot and tell him, "The teacher says, my time is at hand, and I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples." So I always like to try to compare stuff, find stuff in the Old Testament. And, Isaac, before he was born, Abraham sends his servant to his homeland to find a bride for Isaac. And one of the key things that he saw was Rebecca coming out, and she had a water pot. So that's what he was looking for. So
he actually prayed for that sign. "Lord, give me a sign. If this is a woman, let her come out." So that's pretty cool. It's also like when you read it, you think, a man with a water pot. Okay, Lord, I'm going to send you into a city of thousands of 10,000s of people, and you're going to look for a water pot. But if you've ever been to the Eastern world, you know that it is not a man's job to carry water. That is the work of women in the family, And so a man carrying a water pot is actually quite an odd thing. I've actually been in Eastern cultures where you feel bad for the women because they're carrying these heavy water pots. And I've carried water pots before. And when you carry water pots, all the women stop what they're doing and they laugh because a man is carrying a water pot. It just is out of place for them. And so this is kind of, I don't know why the man was carrying a water pot, but Jesus said, hey, you're going to find a sign. This thing's going to be a little different. You'll find a man carrying a water pot. So Ralph, whether or not Jesus had arranged this, ahead of time, even in the we might call it a small miracle, but still a miracle of Jesus saying, here's how you're going to know out of all the houses, here's how you're going to know what to find. What else jumps out, you guys? Tommy, Mark, what do y'all see in this passage?
I just kind of found it interesting always about the disciples' response, to his statement about someone will betray me, because they says each one of them asked, is it I? So you kind of wonder what they were doing, if they were you first wonder, number one, I think they're so loyal. Why did they even ask that? And number two, they did ask that. Did they just feel like his knowledge was so overpowering that it could be one of them? Or maybe was it just a process of elimination for them? They figured if he'll tell them, then they'll be able to narrow that down.
Yeah, I think that is a remarkable question. I actually had a Facebook post memory that came up yesterday, I guess it was, and it was based off just kind of reflection on that question: is it I? And then, I need to ask that question. Someone's going to be. What if we were sitting in that room and Jesus said, "One of you is going to betray me"? Now we would immediately think like Peter, well, it won't be me. But then Jesus said it. Jesus just said somebody. Because you look around the group. So even you look around this computer screen, and what I see is 4 men that I know to be faithful followers of the Lord. Well, that's who they were in the room with. They were in the room with people that they knew to be faithful followers of Jesus, who had given up everything to follow Jesus. And then Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. I mean, it is that moment where you go, what? Imagine you're Matthew and you think, well, surely it won't be Peter. I mean, could it be John? Could it be, who could it be here? And then you end up with that natural question, well, could it be me? And I think it's a question that, what if we were sitting in that room? What if Jesus, jumped in on this Zoom call and said, one of you is going to betray me. One of you is going to leave the ministry. One of you is going to deny the faith. I think a natural question would be, knowing the own sinfulness of my own heart and the ability my heart has to rebel even against the good things of God, I think it's a natural question. Look at the
irony here. The irony here is, all of them going around the room, Lord, is it I? And not to be left out, Judas, Lord, is it I?
Yeah, but Judas didn't say Lord. Judas said Rabbi.
Yeah, he said Rabbi.
There's a difference in that distinguishing. Some commentators said every other one said Lord, and they called him Lord, but there's never a mention where Judas called him Lord. He called him Rabbi at each time, or teacher at each time. So, as far as when we look at who is going to betray somebody, who is going to call him Lord, or who's going to just say, well, he's a great teacher.
Yeah,
he's a great man.
That's a great point.
Feature.
It's like that thing, which one of these don't belong,
Right. One of these things is not like the other. Yeah. And, I'm thinking about Peter, who said, there's no way I'll deny you. But of course he did. And so which is the wiser approach? Is it wiser to say, I will never deny you? Or is it wiser to say, oh, it might be me. I could betray Jesus. Which one do you think is a wiser approach in our personal following of Jesus? I hope everybody watching this is submitted to Jesus, not just as a teacher, but as a Lord, as their Lord. But which one do you think is, as followers of Jesus, as professing followers of Jesus, which approach should we take? The Peter approach, or in this moment where they all think, well, maybe it could be me?
I never want to be the one that would betray somebody. But if I get to the point where I'm thinking, could it be me? Then the next question I say, Lord, may it never be.
Yeah.
may it never be. And it's almost like that question that Paul asked the question just to refute himself. Should we sin so that grace may abound? God forbid.
Yeah.
I think I have myself muted. I'm sorry, I was talking earlier, I forgot. But I think the one thing that jumped out of me on that, what are you laughing at, Ralph?
This is convenient.
I was talking away, man, and it was muted, but my email was going off. But I think the one thing that jumped out at me, the one thing we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but, Jesus usually, for the most part, answered a question with a question, but, he didn't parse his words, and he picked his words very carefully. And the one thing that really jumped out here to me was in verse 24, it says, the Son of Man who is to go just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful statement. Jesus chooses his words very carefully, and he doesn't just say things to say things. He answers things with a question. But if I was in that room and I knew that, I wouldn't want to hear those words.
Well, I read this story to my boys last night as I was putting them to bed, and Emerson said, "Daddy, what's betrayed?" And I had to tell him what betrayed was, and I said, "It's somebody that acts like they're with you, and then all of a sudden they turn on you, and they're not with you anymore; they're against you." And that's the easiest way I could explain it to them. Somebody that acts like they're there, and God forbid that we would do that in the ministry, to act like we're there and not be, and then to portray Christ, or even just as a Christian.
Do you think that Judas might have thought that he was going to receive the same answers as the other 11?
I don't know. I'm interested in why Judas asked, because we know from the text, Judas had already made the arrangements. Yep. He knew what he was going to do. And, maybe he was having second thoughts. He had taken the money, yes, but he had not yet worked out and arranged. He's going to leave just momentarily. I don't know. Maybe he's looking even for confirmation from Jesus. Like, well, I guess it is going to be me.
Well, one of the commentators said that Satan had already been pursuing him as he took the money. And then now the Bible says that, who is it, Lord? Is it I? And he answered, he who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. And in John, he actually says that
gave him bread.
It is he whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then when he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him.
Yeah.
So then it struck me odd, and maybe you guys can answer this question for me. Jesus immediately said to him, what you're going to do quickly. So I didn't understand, do quickly. And the disciples didn't understand either. What was he talking about? Jesus knew what he was going to do, but why did he tell him to do it quickly? He had just said, tell the teacher of that house, my time is at hand. The teacher's time is at hand. So Jesus knows what's going on. Why does he say do it quickly?
Yeah, this is that one moment in the life of Jesus where he is struggling with, do I go through with the Father's will, or do I follow my own will, my own human will? And we see that, of course, culminated at Gethsemane. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. So anything we say here is speculation. But what you do quickly, maybe it's just Jesus saying, I am marching to the cross, and every step I take gets harder. And the longer this stretches out, the harder it gets to stay in the Father's will. Do this. I know you're going to do it. Do it quickly. It just kind of, to me, I read it and I hear the pain of Jesus. The betrayal's going to happen. The crucifixion's going to happen. And what you do quickly. I hear pain in that statement.
Well, a question too, and could be a big question. Who is he speaking to at that point? Is he speaking to Judas, or is he speaking to Satan, who's entered Judas?
Yeah.
I mean,
you really separate the two.
Can you not?
What about
Yeah.
What about after that in John? He does say that the other disciples had different speculation as to what he was doing. Going to pay money for the poor, or whatever. Is there any thought to? I mean, again, you got the rest of these loyal guys, and all of a sudden he goes, that that they might even turn toward him or turn on him. I've always kind of wondered that, like, why didn't the other disciples all of a sudden get upset if they did figure out who it was?
Yeah, because Jesus gave him the sign.
I wonder too, there's the timeline. There's the issue of timeline where Jesus says, one of you will betray me. And we know they were oblivious to the fact that the crucifixion was about to happen. Jesus kept telling them, but they were, we're the same way. We hear what we want to hear. We see what we want to see. Jesus kept saying, the crucifixion's coming, it's coming. They were oblivious to this. So to them, betrayal, one of you will betray me. Maybe it's going to be this week, next week. But hey, anyway, whoever betrays Jesus, they're certainly not going to harm him because he's Jesus. He's the Messiah. I think that's kind of the mindset they had there. So I don't know. It's, there's so much we're not told under the kind of the backstory there. I want to bring it back to one question.
Can I make a quick comment right there?
Yeah.
The thing that really hit me there is that, is your sin really hidden? I mean, how many times did we see that? There's a lot that we do in secrecy. There's a lot that happens in our lives, but our sin really is not hidden. Right. God knows our hearts. And I think that's an important point right there.
Might even be hidden from other followers of Christ, but it's not hidden from the Lord. It's
not hidden from God.
Yeah, I think, and this is a question we won't necessarily answer. We'll just move on. But I really want to stress this point. That how should we approach our following of Jesus? Should we approach it as Peter, Lord, I'll never deny you? Or should we approach it as they do in this moment? Maybe it's me who will betray you. Which is healthier? And I want to compare it to marriage. Should you approach your marriage in this way? Should you approach your marriage by saying, I will never cheat on my spouse? Or should you approach your marriage by saying, if I'm not careful, I could be the very one who cheats on my spouse? I think you approach it both ways. And I think that you approach it from the first way as a statement of commitment. I will not cheat on my spouse. I have made a commitment to God that I will not cheat on my spouse. But I think you approach it in a wisdom sense, in a protecting, making sure that you're guarding your weak spots. It reminds me of that, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief statement. I think that we would say it this way. We would say, God, I will follow Jesus till the day I die. Lord, help me not to betray or deny Jesus in any way, in anything that I say or do. I think that's the place, the tension that we live in. I want to shift gears a little bit because I know you guys have brought this up previously, the connection between the Passover. This is a Passover meal that they're celebrating, and then the Lord's Supper that we celebrate as a church, as we remember this event on Thursday night. And by the way, Mark is going to lead a time of observing the Lord's Supper tomorrow night on Friday at 6 p.m. on Facebook Live. So just go ahead and prepare yourself for that. Use anything you want to. If you happen to have some grape juice and some unleavened bread, great. But if not, even bread and water will work. This is symbolic. So in kind of preparation for that, what do you guys see as the connection here between the Passover meal and the Lord's Supper that we celebrate?
Well, the Bible tells us that Jesus is the Passover lamb, and he's instituting this supper here, and he's talking about his body being broken at a time where and its blood spilled out at a time where the spotless lambs were being sacrificed for the atonement of sin. And so that's the way I look at this part.
Do you think most Christians make that connection when they take the Lord's Supper to Jesus being the Passover lamb?
I would hope so. I would hope that they would see that and bring in all the aspects of what Scripture talks about, the context of the Jewish culture that was there. I would hope that they wouldn't look at it and just take it for face value of what it says, and they'd look deeper into the context of it and what Jesus was saying to who he was saying it to. And now we see it, and so we have to take it and study it that way. I think the Bible tells us to study to show yourself approved. And even here amongst the five of us, we ask ourselves these questions, and we've studied and we've tried to answer these. And there's still questions that we can't answer, but we've got to go deeper and see. So I hope that most Christians are looking at it and going, you know what, I want to find out what the Passover is about. I want to find out what Jesus was talking about when he said, this is my body, this is my blood.
Yeah, I think one thing we've got to do is not just connect it to the Passover lamb, which certainly we must connect it. Jesus is our Passover lamb. We also have to connect it to the event of the Passover itself and the Exodus, the larger context of the Exodus. So yes, Jesus is our Passover lamb, but what does he accomplish for us? He accomplishes for us deliverance. The New Testament authors pick up on this theme over and over and over again. It's almost the dominant theme of the New Testament. In many ways it is, that Jesus is a new and greater Moses who he's our deliverer, and he brings us out of Egypt, and he's taken us to the promised land. And so when Jesus takes this Passover meal, and don't miss what he's doing here, he's taking this Passover meal that's been celebrated for 1,500 years. He grabs his followers, pulls them in a room, and he says to them, this thing that Moses commanded you to do 1,500 years ago has been all about me. For 1,500 years, our people have taken this meal, and they have remembered Moses and what he did. I'm telling you, it's been about me all along. This is my body that was broken for you. This cup is the new covenant in my blood. For 1,500 years, you've been drinking it, and the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, have told you a new covenant is coming. I'm telling you, then this is the new covenant, and it's the cup of redemption that he's drinking, the cup after supper. Luke tells us, and Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, that this is the cup after supper, which is the cup of redemption. So it's tying into the redemption through the new covenant. So this is a really powerful moment.
That brings it to a whole different perspective when we see Jesus saying, all of this is written about the Son of Man. Mm-hmm. But woe to the one who, Judas essentially. But it almost seems like he's saying, Satan, it's not about you. You've always tried to make it about yourself. You're trying to enter Judas. You're trying to do all these things to make it about yourself. It's written about me. Woe to you. You wish you were never even born. And that's something that, you've talked about it. Jesus has power over Satan. Jesus has power over death and all these things. So, man, that brings that whole statement of it is written about me.
It's about me. Yeah.
One of the questions I've had is, in this passage here, is what do you think was going on in the minds and the hearts of the disciples at this point? Do you think they were beginning to really get it and understand it, of what was about to happen?
No, I don't. Yeah. And the reason I don't is Peter. Peter, who, Peter is going to, I don't know if we'll have time to get into this tomorrow or not, but Peter who's going to say, I will go to death with you. And I believe he meant it. I believe in that moment in his heart, he meant, I will die with you, Jesus. And what he meant is, we're going to storm Jerusalem, and I'll fight right by your side. And if it leads to my death and your death, then so be it. But when Peter gets in the garden, he pulls out his sword, and he's trying to start a war, because he believes Jesus is now going to march into Jerusalem and make everything right. Mm-hmm. And when Peter swipes the sword, Peter was not afraid of death. But in that moment, everything fell apart for him, because Jesus stopped him, and Jesus did not fight, and Jesus went willingly, and Jesus let himself be arrested. So I think even at this point, the disciples can feel, we know from John chapter 10, they can feel the tension is coming as they come back into Jerusalem. But I think they believe that this is the beginning of the end. The apocalypse is here in their minds, and Jesus is going to lead the victorious army, and they're going to be right there fighting by his side. And when the cross comes, and that that shatters everything that they thought was going to happen, they all fall apart. So I think they knew the end was coming, but I think they thought the end would be very different than it was.
So back to our original point, we're talking about, the actual, when we go through this, when we have the Lord's Supper, do we fully understand, what is happening and what we're doing? The disciples, as we said here, they struggled with that. They probably didn't fully understand. And it's important that, there's preparation on our side, in our hearts, as we prepare for the Lord's Supper.
Amen.
Derek, you encouraged us yesterday that the gospel is essential, and that people need to hear that. They need to hear that the gospel message is full of hope. And the Lord's Supper wraps up the gospel in there. And so I appreciate that encouragement, just to let us know that in this time that we're in, man, we could say all kinds of things to make people feel one way or another. But there's one thing that really gives hope, and that's the gospel.
Well said, Mark. I'm sorry, Ralph. I know Mark has a good thought, though. Mark's got a
Well,
great.
we are wearing
I'll
almost the
take
same
that.
kind of shirt here. We did say we were twinning today.
Well, I really wanted to throw it to Mark or Keith. If y'all have any closing thoughts, we're going to wrap up here. But any thoughts?
I'm confused if Mark's already spoken or not.
Mark spoke through Ralph. This
Ditto.
is a big closing thing. All right.
I'm good.
Hey, I want you guys to follow Keith Myrick for a discussion over John 14:28 on the timing of Jesus' Passover meal with the disciples. So if you have questions about that, reach out to Keith. That's Myrick at fbtc.org. Is that it's John 14:28, right?
No,
1828.
1828.
18:28. Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. All right. I think it was in
I
verse.
don't know how Mark feels
18.
about that. So.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, you should know how Mark feels about it.
Well,
Hey guys, thank y'all so much for investing all your time this week in studying this. We'll be back tomorrow. We're also going to be briefly on Saturday. There's not much said about Saturday, but I really want us to reflect on Saturday just about the grieving process the disciples were going through. So thank you guys for your time this week. Thank you for those of you who are following along. Thank you for your encouragement. We're getting a lot of encouraging messages about how this is impacting you this week. Focus your heart and mind on Jesus and what he did for us this week and every week, but especially this week as we specifically remember the cross and the resurrection. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.
God bless you.